and welcome to the first episode of my new series, Book and Page. So before we do each of our books coming up, we're going to do either an author bio or in some cases an explanatory video. If I'm doing something like Greek tragedy or something like that. That way you get an idea of what's going on before we get into the book itself. This time around, The Hobbit is well known enough that I think that we should be okay. I might do a fantasy discussion video at some point, but right now we're just going to jump into our author bio with today's author, J.R.R. Tolkien. Now the full name that's been shortened here, of course, is John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, and Reuel there is actually sort of a traditional family name for middle names. His father had it as a middle name, his brother had it as a middle name, and all his children also had it as one of their middle names. So, J.R.R. Tolkien, lovely full name, but for the most part I'm just going to say Tolkien, because J.R.R. Tolkien is not the easiest thing to pronounce. Okay, so Tolkien was born in 1892 to Arthur Tolkien and Mabel Suffield, actually in South Africa, not in England. His father and mother had moved out there for better prospects for his father's job, and unfortunately they lost him in South Africa in 1896, and so Mabel picked up her two sons at the time, Tolkien and his younger brother, and moved back to England. They moved around for a bit, and in 1900 Mabel entered the Roman Catholic Church, which seemed to have sort of made the rest of the family shun her, except for her sister that joined at the same time, and Tolkien was thus brought up as a Roman Catholic. And the family friend and parish priest, Father Francis Morgan, entered the picture, which was good, because he would take care of the two brothers following Mabel's death in 1904. So not a super easy childhood, losing both parents very early on. But Tolkien did have some luck. He met his future wife, Edith Brant, in 1908, when he was just 16, but Father Morgan actually forbid him to contact her further until he was 21, which he obeyed, but when he was 21 he quickly started up the relationship again, and it flourished throughout their shared lives. He was already very competent in several languages at that point, not just the educational ones like Latin and Greek, but several others. He was fascinated with Finnish, if you could believe it. And he ended up going into classics at Oxford, but following a poor showing, as it were, he moved into English language and literature, which is a positive for the rest of us. Then, unfortunately, World War I broke out. So that's 1914. Tolkien actually wasn't conscripted right away. He finished his education between 1915 into 1916. And when it looked like he wasn't going to be able to avoid going to war, he married Edith in 1916, right before he was deployed. In fact, he made it to the Western Front right in time for the Somme offensive, which is not a good point to have been involved. Unfortunately, he caught trench fever and remained sick for most of the rest of the war, so he was sent home and served on several home fronts at different bases until the end of the war, though he did lose several friends and some very close to him during that time. And in fact, the more you look at Lord of the Rings, knowing he fought World War I, you can certainly see points that were likely inspired by his life at war. And in fact, during the war, he started writing things down. The Lost Tales, for the most part, were written at this time, even in the trenches, and in fact, he admits that he wrote some when shells were falling on them. They were being bombed, and he relied on his fantasy world already. Okay, so following the war, Tolkien ended up working for the Oxford English Dictionary, but then moved to the University of Leeds to serve as what is called a reader, which would closest approximation be an assistant professor. And then in 1925, he applied for and surprisingly was given the post of the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford. And having gone there as a student, Oxford was the perfect place for him to be. It should be noted, academically, you will not find a super long list of his works published, especially during his lifetime. They're certainly matched with his fictional ones, but that didn't mean he wasn't an important academic writer. He was actually very influential, and a lot of people still read his work on Beowulf and monsters, which is a big one, and of course his works on languages have always been an influential point. While he was at Oxford, he wasn't just writing academically, he also helped found the famous Inklings, which is sort of a loose coalition of like-minded individuals and not so like-minded individuals who would sit down and read each other work and talk and argue. Arguments were often very true. Now, while they were mostly stationed at Oxford, you weren't required to be a member of the Oxford community. In fact, Charles Williams certainly wasn't. The one note is that you did have to be male. You could not be a woman and be part of the Inklings. Yeah, no, I have problems with that, and certainly there were people around them that also had problems with it. Dorothy Sayers, I know her most well for her translation of Dante's Divine Comedy, was well known to all of them and would have been an Inkling if they had bothered to let her, but they didn't, so... truth be told, I might do another video on the Inklings, but it's an extensive group. It was always changing. Membership came and went. So if you're a little curious, the literary lives of the Inklings, focusing on J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Owen Barfield, and Charles Williams, who are only, of course, 4 of them, is a fantastic read. I enjoyed this thoroughly and found it very informative. So... if you're interested in some reading about the Inklings, go for that one. The Inklings was sort of an interesting group for Tolkien because as he got more and more into his fictional writing with The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion, the group was a bit notorious for liking him less because he would come and read his fictional writing and it wasn't appreciated by a lot of members of the group. C.S. Lewis seemed to enjoy it. He's also another member who ended up writing a lot of fiction. But a lot of other group members were just like, shut up about the trees! Thank God Tolkien did not shut up about the trees. Because again, we've got some fantastic work from him. But the Inklings sometimes were not as supportive as we like to think they were. It should be noted that Tolkien and Edith, having married in 1916, had 4 children throughout their life, 3 sons and a daughter. And in fact, his first published fiction, which is The Hobbit, was conceived as a study of what hobbits are, and ended up becoming a story that he told his children before he even wrote it down. In fact, it was not finished when he had somebody approach him about getting it published. So it became an instant success in the public eye, but as is true with a lot of public works and fiction works, academically, yeah, academics not super great when the public likes things, because the public isn't supposed to know about these things. Academics are. So he published The Hobbit in 1937 originally, and like I said, it gained great success. And in trying to follow it up, he actually tried to get The Silmarillion published. And that was met with immediate rejection and an insistence that he should try and continue in the line of The Hobbit, write a new Hobbit. Which resulted in 16 years, if you can believe it, of him writing The Lord of the Rings. Mind you, when you take a look at this, you can see why it took a while. It's a gigantic text, and these are all just the basic writing. I don't think any... oh yeah, no. The last one does include at least some of the appendix. So, massive work, and he originally wanted to publish it all in one volume. And publishers are like, no. And in fact, they ended up, between 1954 and 55, they did publish it in 3 parts, but it was expected to be like a commercial failure and a commercial loss. Like, it was only because he was really good friends with the publisher that they went ahead and just decided they were going to accept that loss. They severely misunderestimated how well received it was going to be by the public. Literally, just, they were doing so well that they quickly went to the paperback printing, because you have to actually sell enough hardcover versions of the book to make a paperback copy worth it. It became worth it, and just sales exploded. Reviews, again, were mixed, especially from academic sources, but C.S. Lewis wrote a glowing review of it. And in fact, so much public appraisal for this that a lot of people started contacting Tolkien to the point that he was overwhelmed and actually had to move. Because people were just, like, asking if he believed Frodo had succeeded, or if he'd actually failed. Was Sam the true hero? How were orcs created? A lot of things like that. Because people just loved it so much they wanted answers to these questions. And Tolkien was getting up in years at that point in time that he sort of wished he had retired early because he was having problems. Following the great success of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien did continue to publish a lot of scholarly works combined with fictional works. For example, some of his big ones you can actually get in Tree and Leaf combined together. And this is a fantastic one with Tree and Leaf, Leaf by Nigel in it. On Fairy Stories is a fantastic scholarly discussion of fantasy. So, again, another fantastic book, especially if you're interested in some of Tolkien's work himself. Not that big, and Fairy Stories and Leaf by Nigel really work well together. Fortunately, Edith, his wife, passed away in 1971, and Tolkien followed her 2 years later in 73. Christopher Tolkien, one of his sons, actually continued to make sure that Tolkien's work was getting published, putting together the Lost Tales as fully as he could, and helping the Silmarillion get published as well. So that's Tolkien's life in a nutshell. Again, it gets certainly more complicated than that. Again, On the Lives of Inklings is a very good source. You can certainly find other ones as well. But before we head into The Hobbit, there's just 2 little facts about Tolkien's death that are interesting, and the second one is certainly very meaningful. Now, if you're ever tested on this, the way to remember the year Tolkien passed away is actually the verse of the Rings poem from The Lord of the Rings. He passed away in 1973, and all you have to remember is 3 rings went to the elves, 7 to the dwarves, 9 to mortal men, and the 1 ring to rule them all. A little more serious on that side, he and his wife were buried together, and they actually shared a gravestone. And beside Edith's name is the name Luthien, and beside Tolkien's name is the name Beren. And these are actually 2 of Tolkien's recurring characters. Some of his first in the realm of Middle-earth and the Silmarillion, and they were in a very loving and important relationship that remained important for Tolkien throughout his life. So those names are on his gravestone, shared with his wife. Okay, so with that said, we will be starting into The Hobbit on Sunday, going chapter by chapter, as it is not a particularly long book, but very interesting with a few parts that Tolkien just slips in there that can easily pass you by if you're not paying attention. So, let's head on in, and I'm going to get reading. See you next time.